Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's live tech talk about the North Foils MA front wings and the new stabilizers. I will start out the stream with a little bit of an action video showing me riding all three of the MA foil sizes, and after that, we will get into it. So enjoy the video. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that video and it gave you a little bit of a insight into the capabilities of these wings. So this year, North released 3 new medium aspect wings. There's a 1350, the 1200, and the 1050. And my pretty much daily driver is the smallest one here, which is the 1050. That's that one. And I use it quite a lot with the S210 stabilizer. But there are also its bigger brothers. There is the 1250 here. I mean the 1200. And there is the 1350. Now, I'll just bring up some details here. Right, so here we've got the 3 wings, and we have basically the specs on them. So you can see that the actual span doesn't change so much, and the aspect ratio gets smaller as the wings get bigger. So the 1050 is the most high aspect at 6.2, the 1200 at 5.6, a little bit less, and the 1350 is a lower aspect than that. They're all sort of on a limited span. Like the 1350 has a span of 830 millimeters, so 83 centimeters. The 1200 is got 815 millimeters, and then a straight 80 centimeters or 800 millimeter span for the 1050. This is actually quite nice because it sort of makes the sort of turning rate or the turning circle more or less the similar size for all the foils. So there's a very similar feel. They all feel like they're part of the same family. and that there's not like a massive difference on agility. I use these mainly with the 600 fuselage, the carbon fiber 600. This makes them very, very nice and turny. If you are more of a beginner and you want a bit more stability and accept a larger turning circle because of that, the 700 is also a really good option. But if you want to get the maximum sort of surfability out of these wings, the 600 is sort of the best thing. The rider weight that North recommends here, I mean, it's pretty simple. You know, the 1350 works for everybody, the 1200 works for everybody. And then they're saying for people less than 85 kilos, I would say, okay, if you're intermediate, yes. But if you're a fairly advanced rider, I would say no. I weigh 86 kilos at the moment. I'm really happy. At a certain point, a month ago, I was weighing even 88 kilos. I still rode the 1050 quite a lot, even in quite light winds. So those are the new mid-aspect wings. We'll get back to those a little bit later. But what we also want to have a look at is the new stabilizers. And these are really a game changer for the North lineup. So here we have the big one, is the 320. Then we have the 270. And then my daily driver, the 210, right here. Now, compared to the S1 stabilizer from last year, these make all the foils work so much better. If you are still riding last year's HAs or the R series wings, these stabilizers give you more pitch stability, more turnability, higher speed. Everything is better now. So if you want to upgrade your older setup, definitely have a look at these stabilizers. Now you look at them, essentially the S320 is a sort of direct replacement for the S1, sort of size-wise. It is essentially geared towards a more beginner rider, heavier rider who wants more stability, especially on the pitch axis, and sort of wants it to be a little bit more relaxed and slow to turn. The 270 is sort of the next step up. If you are looking for something that's got a decent turning radius, but it's not too fast and still very controllable, you have the 270. And then for riders who are looking for the maximum turnability, sort of really loose ride, you're looking at the 210. Like I said before, the 210 is my daily driver. I use that for everything, for wave riding, free ride, race, etc. That is currently my main stabilizer for all those disciplines. Okay, you can see that the aspect ratio is more or less staying the same on all of these three stabilizers. They're essentially the same family. We're just essentially scaling down, up and down for that. I do have to say the 270 is something I prefer when I need a bit more control and I'm not really going for fast turning and sort of wave riding. If I'm actually going, for example, downwinders where I just want sort of a more relaxing ride, the 270 stabilizer is really good for that. Okay, so next thing we'd like to talk about is sort of the weight. So I mainly ride the full carbon setup. That is with this mast here. Let's just get the cover off. Most people have seen the carbon fiber Sonar 85. This is my daily driver mast. I use this all the time. Also for racing, surfing, pumping, everything. This carbon mast weighs 1.8 kilos. And the carbon fiber fuselage 1050 front wing with the S210 is 1.5 kilos. So all in all, we're just under 3 kilos just over 3 kilos for the smallest setup for the MAs, and it obviously scales up a little bit with the 1350 coming in at almost 3.5 kilograms, which is a fairly decent weight for these type of foils. Most of the weight from the system comes from the front wings. Front wings are built really solidly. They can take a beating. I've had a lot of ground contacts with these. They take them quite easily. They're fairly solid. There's very little foam inside, so there's a little bit more beef, a little bit more weight to them, but you don't have to worry about these breaking too easily. That said, I may not have broken one, but as in foiling, if you're freestyling with something, everything has a limit. Hi, Mike Miller. That was a really nice mask bag, something for Sapfoil, I think. Yeah, that's true. It's a really nice bag. It protects the base plate. If you want to actually see it close, here it is. So it encloses. You basically have the base plate protected. The bottom of the fuselage is protected when everything is inside. I personally wish it was just a little bit bigger. It's a very tight fit, but it does its job very well. Protects the mast and looks really cool too. So the weight, it's not the lightest carbon foil. It's not the heaviest. It's lighter than the Sapfoil foils that I ride. So it actually is quite nice. And the good thing is, so far I haven't broken any of these yet, even though they're like slightly lighter than the Sapfoil. Thanks. Now, what are the MAs for? They are geared more towards sort of the intermediate and surf style rider. So if you're looking for something that's in the waves that has a really nice rail-to-rail feel, that's really surfy, that's what the MAs are for. And also the 1350 is really nice if you combine it with sorry about that, if you combine it with the 320 stabilizer. And also there's actually shim kits now from North where you can basically shim up or basically increase your angle of your stabilizer and get it really stable. So for somebody who's just learning to foil, the 350 with like the 320 with a degree extra angle will make it super stable and really stiff, like a really stiff ride, and make it easy to learn on. And then if you're riding it sort of on the standard thing, if you're looking for the really agile setup, you have the S210 or the S270s for that type of rider. So the MAs cover a very large sort of segment for the riders. Another cool thing on the MAs is they're not that slow. They're actually quite fast. Actually, my teammate Fabian was actually racing with this in the Spanish Nationals together with me. And he still was getting like really good results. He ended 4th overall in there against some really stiff competition. I finished 3rd, so he was just behind me. And I was using something else, and we'll talk about that when that comes out next month. So these foils, I have a really nice speed potential, so they're in larger waves. If you're trying to go fast, if you're looking for like a medium aspect foil to freestyle with that still keeps some speed, the MAs will actually really do that. Even the 1350 is not slow. It can actually go really slow, but you can push it to quite high speeds, especially with the smaller stabilizers. Yeah. So now, I've been talking mainly about winging at the moment through this, but this is also like my main wing that I use for kite foiling. I really love the 1050 for kite foiling. It is fast, it is turny, it's really fun, it's really pitch stable. So like tricks like sit down tricks on it are really easy, 360s, sliding tricks, and so on. It's really nice. You'll note that a lot of foils nowadays have this sort of gull wing shape to their curve. The MAs are more sort of conservative in this respect. They're basically more of like a straight downward curve. And you can notice there's a bit of washout here on the tips. And the tips curve down. Now, the pros of this, it makes it really nice rail to rail. The con of this is when you breach, you need to be quite sure-footed. If you breach and you're sort of loose on the board, they tend to not recover as well from breaching as, for example, something that's more gull wing shaped. Now, for kite foiling, I would seriously recommend, if you are a really heavy rider or a beginner, 1350 all the way. But I would say for kite foiling, maximum 270 stabilizer, but probably 210 will do it for most people, even for a beginner who's learning to kite foil. Obviously, the MA series is always also compatible with the aluminum mast and the aluminum fuselages. So if you're looking for something just a little bit cheaper, you have the choice for the aluminum setup. And you can also mix and match. The aluminum masts fit on the carbon fuselages. You can put an aluminum fuselage on the carbon mast, which if you're winging and you're a heavier guy and you're learning new tricks that you know you're going to land really hard, if you're using something like a bit bigger like the 1350, I would really recommend to use the aluminum fuselage because that is a lot more durable than the carbon fuselage for that. Because when learning freestyle, you're never landing that well, and eventually, yeah, you can break carbon parts. Everybody can do that. I don't know a single foil that can't break if you land it wrong. So having an aluminum fuselage, you have an extra weight. It's almost double the weight of the carbon fuselage, but you are fairly happy to not break the fuselage. And later, when you're actually more confident with the tricks, you can go to the lighter carbon fuselage, and that is more than strong enough if you're landing more or less cleanly. But for heavy freestyle and heavier riders, anybody over 90 kilos, I really recommend that you use the aluminum fuselage instead of the carbon fuselage if you're doing and learning new tricks in freestyle. For beginners, there's obviously the 72 centimeter mast option. The 70 centimeter mast options in carbon and in aluminum. So that is something you want to consider if you're learning. Just a little bit shorter mast makes it a little bit easier. If you're looking for also if you're surfing and surf foiling in more shallower conditions, the shorter mast is something I really would recommend for that. It makes everything a bit more agile, but also you have 10 centimeters less depth, which will help you clear the reef and so on. So most of the riders here I know are on the shorter masts. Santi FS, hello. What is the minimum wind conditions used the MA 1050 for a wing foil? For me, I'm 85 kilos now, but when I was doing most of the testing for these, so on, with let's say with a 6-meter wing, I need just about 12, 13 knots to go with the 1050. Yeah, with the big light wind wings we have now, like the 8 meters, the 7 meter, 8 meters, I can still get going with the 1050 in about 10 knots. Yeah. And that sort of brings me sort of the pumpability of the MAs. The MAs are obviously not very sort of high aspect wings, so you can't expect like amazing pump performance from them. What they do very well, they pump up really well, but they don't have a very long glide. So if you put your wing in neutral or you're surf foiling and you're trying to go longer distances or you're duck starting, that works fine, but you need to keep the speed up, especially on the smaller ones. You can pump them, but you really have a high cadence. You got to keep that speed up. They don't really glide that well. They are medium aspect wings, and the profiles are not really that suited for like easy long gliding pumps, but they're really good for sharp turns. Oh, Goofy Regular, thank you for the tip. And your question is, what is more important for surfy feeling or high maneuverability? Short fuselage or small stabilizer? Short fuselage. In sort of that rate. Both together make it really good. But what's really important first, you can still go much shorter on the fuselage and you can still have a big stabilizer, which will keep it really pitch stable, but your yaw will be a lot less resisted. So you can actually yaw the foil around a lot easier. So you can do very sort of sharp sort of yaw turn. But also when you go in for your sort of carving turn, you have basically less drag and you can go for a tighter circle. And if you reduce the stabilizer size, you can go even harder and tighter around with that. So first thing, reduce your the biggest difference will obviously come from the fuselage, and then once you've sort of maxed out or sort of minimized the amount of fuselage you have, you can also then go for a smaller stabilizer, and then you can also reduce the angle of attack of the stabilizer, so sort of have it pointing more neutral, which will make it again faster, less stable, more agile, so that will sort of maximize how tight you can turn. So start with shorten the fuselage, then smaller stabilizer, and then less angle on the stabilizer. I hope that answers your question. Top speed on the M8 1050. The fastest I've gotten it is just about over 30 knots. Like I have to double check the GPS track on that, but I think like the max I got, yeah, was around 30 and a half, something like that. Yeah. But again, that wasn't easy, and that was with a kite. On wing foil, the fastest I've been on the MA is about 25, 26 knots. Right. So that sort of brings me to a topic that was sort of also brought up, day before yesterday in the stream about the Triton on monofoil. Is like, ooh, how can you get like a medium aspect wing to go that fast? So especially with the kite, it's all about power. If you look at sort of a fighter jet, it also doesn't have very like long, high aspect wings. It has stubby, short little wings, very flat profiles, and however, you have a jet engine attached to the back of it, and you can basically have that push through. There's very little resistance to that. So it's more of a resistance thing rather than efficiency. So a medium aspect wing can actually go very fast as long as you have the power to push it that fast in wind sports. If we're talking about speed pumping, for example, dock starting, where we don't have any other sort of engine like a wing, a kite, or a sail or something like that pushing us, the speed is limited. But when we have a wing or a kite, we can go very overpowered, and we can use that power to generate apparent wind. And it's actually more the apparent wind and resistance and sort of the size of our balls that determine how fast you can make a foil go. So as long as the actual profile is not too thick in the front and can handle a decent range, you can make a medium aspect wing or even a low aspect wing go very, very fast. Kiteforum.com. Hope all is well. Been a while. Take care out. Hi, Toby. Scott Hansen's question: top speed MMA. Top 1050 and 1050 versus 500R. Scott. So general comparison. Ooh, everything is almost better. The 1350 has more low end. It's a lot more stable, especially on pitch axis compared to the 1500R. It goes rail to rail better. Way better breach recovery. So when you bring it out of the water, it recovers a lot faster than the 1500R. Pumps way better than the 1500R. It's lighter than the 1500R. The only thing I would say the 1500R does better, it's a lot less susceptible to whitewater turbulence. But that is pretty much it. The 1350, in my opinion, is just a lot nicer ride than 1500R is. I also have to say the 1500R is a very low aspect wing. So, any other questions on the front wings? And I'd like to sort of get back a little bit to the stabilizers. So I'm just gonna... Actually, one small thing I would actually just like to mention, just little quality of life things that North have done here, is, for example, on all the wings, you have the screw sizes that are needed printed on. Also on the front wings. So this way, if you have multiple wings, you can basically know exactly which screws go in and you can't make a mistake. And I really recommend that you have a look at those numbers and don't accidentally put in a too long screw and force it through the fuselage, which on the carbon fuselage is a possibility if you are, for example, using a drill as a screwdriver, which I do. Don't actually do that, but I do use a drill to save time. And one time I got the screw size wrong, and I basically went straight through the top of the fuselage with it. It actually doesn't break the fuselage, but it looks horrible when you actually have a dent in the top of your fuselage. But for that reason, all the screw sizes are printed on. Do I have, Kevin Opar, do I have aspect ratio preferences for jumping? Yes. Now, it all depends. If I want to jump as big as possible, I tend to like more higher aspect wings. Why? Because they have more acceleration. That sort of, as you kick it, obviously because of the acceleration of a high aspect wing, it sort of makes you go higher. Now, however, for freestyle jumping, like for freestyle tricks, I tend to prefer the medium aspect wings. That is mainly because I might not go as high, but I can recover more easily from it. So if I land and I'm not landing quite right, you saw that in the videos, I can sort of pump myself back up easier onto the foil, especially in lighter winds. Because especially for freestyle, I try to take a smaller wing, smaller hand wing, because it's easier to rotate and jump with it. Yeah, if you understand that. And then obviously for that, I just need some like front wing that will get me up on the fly earlier. A high aspect wing will need just a little bit more speed. So going really underpowered on the high aspect wings is not really that great. That said, I do actually like freestyling if I can use a really small high aspect front wing. That is really, really fun. Because it shoots you up really high, and when you can land, it has almost no resistance when it goes in the water. But you tend to over rotate a bit. But when I can use something that small, I'm usually quite powered anyway, and I can, even using a small wing, I can still get up and get going. So that sort of compensates it. But let's say under 20 knots, it just makes more sense for me because also I am a fairly heavy rider to use the medium aspect wings. So actually, for a lot of freestyle training, I use the 1200 instead of the 1050 actually, because it's just a lot easier to land and pump out of tricks. Scott Hansen is asking also, what is the big differences between the 270 and the S1? I mean, the easier answer to that is, or the question should be, is there any similarities between the S1 and the S220? Because there's nothing that you can compare. I don't want to like step on Delta Dave's feet here, but for me, the S1 stabilizer didn't work. It's basically, if you put one of these on any of the older front wings, like 1500R, for example, or the 850 or the old HAs, they work really, really well now. With the S1 stabilizer, they did not work very well. The S1 stabilizer has a lot of drag. It doesn't seem to work at any speeds over 15 knots that well. It sort of loses its adhesion, and the wings start pitching down. If you actually look closely, a lot of my pictures from last year or videos where I'm riding the HA wings, the stabilizer you see there is actually something I made at home. And that's one of my own designs that I made there. And that made the HA 1250 and the 1450 ride so much nicer than the S1 did. The S1 just typically, it rides okay with the R series and like the old 850 and so on, but it doesn't really work well with the faster wings. So these do. These are a lot thinner profile. They are more flat. They don't have that massive up curve that the S1 had. So So yeah, the big difference is these work. The S1, in my opinion, doesn't work. Right. Any other questions? Okay. So yeah, we were talking about the stabilizers. Anyway, if you notice, these stabilizers have a little bit of a winglet shape to there that has sort of helps on your yaw resistance, gives you a bit more stability on speed. And the good thing about the stabilizers are actually also that you only need one size of screw for all the stabilizers. So from the from the 320 down to the 210, it's always the same 16 millimeter screw for that fuselage. And as you can see, these are fairly durable too. I've had, again, you can see these scratches. I've had lots of collisions with rocks here on Fuerteventura during the testing. Fran Puyol, when do you recommend full carbon versus aluminum mast and fuselage? I covered that before a little bit. Now, there's no such thing as full carbon. There's always some kind of a core inside, but I know what you're getting at here. Now, talking about masts. So the aluminum fuselage, the aluminum masts are stiffer, but they are a lot thicker. So if maximum stiffness is what you're looking for, the aluminum mast is actually stiffer. However, the carbon mast is got a thinner profile and it's got a low, sort of a low drag profile. So the carbon mast is faster. And also the weight difference on the mast is not like massively different. 200, 300 grams, give or take, depending on the length. However, on the fuselage, the carbon is half the weight. So that also, because it's far away from your board, the weight on the fuselage is more noticeable than the actual mast weight when riding. So if you're looking for maximum durability, the full aluminum setup makes sense. So aluminum mast, aluminum fuselage. And that is a setup where you're 100% never going to break anything no matter what you do to it. Actually, I shouldn't say that. Within reason, if you smash into a rock, I'm pretty sure you can still do some damage to an aluminum mast. But like normal freestyle jumping, landing heavy, landing on the tips and so on, you're not going to break or bend the aluminum fuselage. However, you have that swing weight and so on from the fuselage. If it's like 400 grams more than the carbon, it's more noticeable. Now, carbon is always nice. It's lighter to carry around. The mast is thinner, so you can go a little bit faster, but you have a bit more flex, and obviously you don't have the durability that you do of the aluminum setup. Also, the aluminum setup is a lot cheaper. So if you're just starting out and you're not looking for like the highest end setup, you can still choose which parts you want aluminum. And on the mast, you can save a decent amount of money if you go for the aluminum masts. Santi is asking which stabilizer works best with the 1250HA. They both work good. They both work really good. So obviously the S210 is the faster and more agile of the two. And the S270 is the more sort of stable, more pitch stable one there. So whatever you want. If you want a little bit slower, take the 270. If you want as fast as possible and as fast turning as possible, the S210. If you're currently using the S1 stabilizer, you'll immediately notice how much more pitch stable it is. When you're riding with the S1 on the HA1250, as you're going along, as soon as you go over 15 knots, you have a tendency to start pitching down, and it's like the stabilizer's not doing anything anymore. And the entire like new stabilizer series will just actually have you going really straight and really nicely without all that sort of pitchiness. From Puyos for Binig, if you are covering board topics today, what are the key trends in 2023 on wingboards? Good question. That's actually a whole nother video. I mean, most people who follow my channels and my social media know that I'm fairly hot-headed and controversial on this topic. But my guess for 2023 is that I think Fnatic will invent tail rocker. That's the next thing. Just like they came out with no more kicktails and double concaves in their boards this year. Um, so for 2023, you'll see a lot more brands giving up on gimmicks in their boards, especially gimmicks that take away performance from the boards. So you'll see a lot less of these channels, concaves, steps, and all this other stuff that actually works in planing boards, but not actually in displacing and foiling boards. So what you'll see is a lot more boards where you'll have a bit more clean bottoms, but you'll also see a board like boards from even the bigger manufacturers going away from a completely flat tail to having a decent amount of tail rocker. So if you don't quite understand what I'm talking about, you have two parts of the rocker or the scoop rocker line to a board. Scoop is the basically nose section of the board, and then the rocker is essentially how the board, if you put it flat on the table or the ground, how the board is rocking. So that's a tail rocker. So especially foils, for example, like the sap foils and even the north foils and so on, they are sort of more designed for boards that actually have a bit of tail rocker, typically boards that have about 15 millimeter to 20 millimeter tail rocker, so the nose up of the board is matched. For example, if you put a sap foil on the bottom of a Fnatic Skywing, because it's almost completely flat, you tend to nose down, and you have to put a plate shim to keep the nose up. And I think next year that will sort of sort itself out. So flat bottom stick boards and 90-degree angles. No 90-degree angles, and not thick boards. I actually think that the thickness of the boards will probably go down a bit, especially the fact that once you start taking out all these double concaves and steps and all this other stuff, you can still keep the decent amount of volume in the tails. So yeah, what I'm actually doing here is sabotaging myself, because any of the boards I've designed for for next year, I'm telling you what I've done. So we'll stop it there. But essentially, I'm pretty sure that simple things like getting rid of all the gimmicks and so on will be gone, and a 90-degree angle between the mast and the board. Um, that's something that should have never been in a foil board. If you look at kite foil boards from decent brands from the last 10 years almost, you know that like an actual completely flat bottom and a 90-degree angle doesn't actually work. And that's not something that we've been seeing in boards in a while for kite foiling and for wing foiling. Anybody who's tried a board with a decent amount of tail rocker and a very good geometry setup and a clean bottom notices immediately how much easier it is to get these boards up on the fly. All right, is there any other questions on that? I know that we went a bit of a tangent here onto board design. But actually it's a good time to explain. Yeah, the North foils work really well with boards that have a little bit of tail rocker. And if you have a board which has got a completely flat tail, and you're on a North foil with the new stabilizer set, and you're sort of still noticing that at higher speeds the board has a feeling that it's nosing down, or that you never really have the right front foot pressure, get yourself some plate shims so you can basically widen that delta, sort of that distance between the nose and the foil itself, so the nose rides a bit higher, and that will actually solve that wandering center of lift problem and the sort of your front foot issue. And it will actually also make the board take off nicer, and when you have touchdowns, it'll actually allow it to recover nicer. So think of it as a way, if the board and the foil are actually parallel and you touch down, your nose is still trying to stick to the water. Whereas if it's slightly raised, as the foil's coming up, you're transferring onto the tail, and it's a lot easier to get release. So North foils, also sap foils, boards with rocker work a little bit better. Just on the small things again, all the hardware on all the North foils, it's along the board, it's Torx 40 M8 screws. There's different lengths for the different thickness of the front wings, but the fuselage to mast screws are Torx 40 M8. The front wings and the stabilizers are M8 Torx 40 countersunk screws. So you need one tool to put it all together. Same thing, the screws for the nuts for the tracks are also Torx 40 M8. Those are 30 millimeters long, so those fit in almost every imaginable track box at the moment. So one tool that saves a lot of time where you don't have to switch between tools, because a lot of foils nowadays you have mix of M8 and M6 hardware, and that makes it just a little bit more difficult. Okay, now if that is everyone who's got any questions, I will run the action video one more time for the people who joined late. And if there are no more questions after that, I will end the live stream there. I hope I answered everyone's questions satisfactorily. If you still have some questions open after the end of the live stream, put those in the comments below after the video gets posted on the channel. I'm happy just to go in and answer those tomorrow morning. So enjoy this video, and if there are no more questions, thanks for watching. If you want to support the channel, there's a link in the description below to my Buy My Coffee page. And then join me next week for another live tech talk. It's still open about what I'm going to talk about. Have fun on the water and rock on.